Today we're talking about how to be a clear, compelling, and credible communicator. I was reminded of this recently because there was somebody that I know that has a lot of experience and a lot of credibility in her craft. And I heard her hosting an event, an audio event, and I was amazed at how timid she came across. It was definitely a misrepresentation of who she is and her expertise. It was really unfortunate. And that is one example. There are many examples where we give away our power, where we do not come across as clear, compelling, or credible. And it's really unfortunate because these are simple shifts that we can make in our communication to make that difference so that we do sound like we know what we're talking about. We exhibit the expertise that we have, as well as the experience and our know-how. So I don't want anybody to be lost or left without the tools to be able to do this. So I want to jump right in and say, I want to give you some tips around being clear, being compelling, and being credible. First of all, being clear. We have to have a point. This requires prep. In advance, think about who your audience is, what they care about, what matters to them, and what is it that you could share in a way that's, again, I say relevant again, in a way that's relatable to them. So that clarity is really important. So let's say you're presenting to a bunch of financial executives, for example, and perhaps your whole goal is to deliver the numbers of the quarter. And oftentimes what happens is we data dump on people. We give lots of information, and instead you want to be thinking about what matters to them. They're busy, they're probably pretty sophisticated, they're intelligent, they care about the numbers, they don't care about a whole lot else. So then how can you position that? So one of my favorite examples is a real story where a gentleman was needing to present to his board of finance directors. And I remember us talking about this I said, okay, so what do you care about? What matters most? And he goes, Karen, I'm a numbers guy. I don't do stories and examples. I said, yeah, but come on, let's figure something out. You want to be influential, right? And he said, well, of course. So what we came up with based on his hobbies, he goes, oh, I love sporting events. I love going to sports. So he goes, okay, what is the number one thing that you do before you walk into a sporting event or as you're walking in? You look at the scoreboard, of course, after you get your beer and popcorn. And this was such a great example of the thing that we're talking about here is how do you create an analogy that makes it interesting? And this is actually a really good one for the compelling of the three C's that we're talking about: clear, compelling, and credible. But in the spirit of clarity, it's knowing your audience and figuring out what matters to them. This was a group that was also interested in sports. And so the way that he was able to connect with them was through that analogy. Now, I also was coaching another person, VP of compliance for a bank. And I remember her just delivering numbers, just all the numbers. And I said, well, hold on a second. What is the point here? And she said, oh, well, the point is that we are 10% above where we were last quarter. And so I'm giving all the data and the numbers to support that. And I said, that's fantastic. Can you do that after you state the point? I shouldn't say, I didn't ask her if she could. I said, that will be a lot more valuable if you state that point right up front. Hey, we're 10% ahead of last quarter. Now I want to dive deeper into the numbers because we've got to get to that point first. So in the spirit of clarity, the number one tip is to have a point and get to it right up front. That way, your audience can then listen for the details later if they are interested in listening to more. So really important to get that bottom line up front. And actually, that is a term from the US military called BLUF, BLUF, bottom line up front. And not only is this important in the spoken word, but I would also recommend thinking about this related to the written word. For example, take a look at the last 3 to 5 emails that you wrote and ask yourself, where was the point? Did I bury the lead or the point at the bottom of the email, or did I state it up front? Because a great practice is to state the point in the subject line or in the first sentence, and then state there are more details below if you'd like to know the logic behind this. Or if you'd like more information, feel free to read on. But this is the conclusion, or this is the point, stating that up front. Bottom line up front, very, very important. The other thing that's helpful in clarity in a message when you're communicating, especially if you're giving a presentation, is to have 3 key points. So you have your main overarching point and then 3 supporting sub points. And it can be really helpful to state those all right away. Like, here are the 3 points. I'm going to walk through each of those. Now, another strategy is to do one at a time. You just want to make sure that you get to all 3 and you don't leave your audience waiting and wondering, where is that 3rd point? So being mindful of that is really key. So clarity, really important. The second one is not necessarily in this order, but compelling. How do you become a compelling communicator? A big thing to do is to make sure that you're focused on making this relatable to your audience, make it relevant, and also have that eye contact. That helps to create a compelling communicator, because connection is the #1 way to make somebody feel like they are with you in your content and also in your delivery. So this really requires both content and delivery with being compelling, because you've got to be engaging. And one of the ways that we do that is through our facial expressions, through our voice, through the way that we carry ourselves. From a content perspective, being compelling is having great content that's interesting, again, and relevant to the audience. And one of the things that you can do to make your content as interesting and relevant is to tell stories, give examples, share analogies, add some humor in there, use some data, some statistics. Like if I told you 7% of women negotiate their first job starting salary compared to 57% of men. That's a huge statistic. Now, that's one example. That's obviously not necessarily the topic that we're talking about here today, but notice how you probably leaned in or listened more when you heard that stat. So adding these things in can make us a more compelling communicator. And then remember, related to being compelling, your voice, changing up the volume, the pitch, the pace, making sure that you speak with conviction so that it sounds like you know what you're talking about, as opposed to if I used upspeak, the slang term for when you say statement with a question mark, I might say, it's really important to know what you're talking about. If I end it with a question mark, I'm not going to sound very sure of myself. And that leads us to the 3rd C, which is credible. There are so many different ways that we can show credibility, but one of the best things that we can do is to pause. Add the pause into your speech pattern. When we pause, it shows control. It shows calm. And when we are calm, when we are in control, our audience is more inclined to listen to us. They are more inclined to trust us. They are also more inclined to stay with us because they're going to feel like we're taking them somewhere. And as a leader, we need to make sure that we are taking people somewhere, because if we're not going to come across as very credible. I'm guessing, like me, you have been on a conference call before, and you can feel that the person isn't speaking with authority and they're maybe going around the point and you're not even sure what they're trying to say. It's easy to want to take over that call or to just tune out. So I don't want to have anybody take over or tune out when you're talking. You want to make sure that you come across with that credibility, but you do that by pausing occasionally, adding in that punctuation to your speech pattern, just like you would never think to write an email without punctuation. We've got to make sure that we also have the pause in there. And so it's basically punctuation. It's putting a period at the end of your sentence. It's putting a comma where appropriate as well. And the other component of credibility is that vocal conviction as well. Very similar to becoming a compelling communicator, you want to have that authority in the way that you're speaking. So making sure that you have the pause, making sure that you have the vocal conviction, so you speak as if you know what you're talking about. And then the other thing with credibility is making sure that you hold your posture in a way, like you have a strong handshake, you have your shoulders back, You look people in the eye. So many of these components we're talking about clear, compelling, credible. They go together like a beautiful package. And so remember, when you are communicating, you want to be clear. So get to that point right up front. You want to be compelling in your facial expressions, in your voice, and also in the stories and examples that you share, along with those analogies and anecdotes. And then, of course, becoming as credible as possible. Make sure you pause. The biggest killer of credibility is filler words. So, when those creep in, it takes away from people thinking that we have credibility. And I want to make sure that you come across in the best way possible and do everything within your control to make sure that you don't miss any more opportunities. So I look forward to hearing how those go for you. And by the way, if you are interested in doing more of this work, that you're interested in having a community of people around you, I have a coaching group called the Powerhouse. It's a mastermind, it's coaching. We meet twice a month, and there's also individual coaching. So if you want to advance your career, you want to speak with more power and authority, you want to show up in a way where people think that you are clear, compelling, and credible, definitely consider setting up a call with me and we can talk more about it and see if it's a fit. Have a great rest of your day.